Hi, everyone. Thank you to those who joined us already. We'll get started in just a couple minutes. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. So thanks so much for joining us today for the native versus hybrid webinar on how to determine the best approach for app development, hosted by Technology Rivers. Today, we're going to be exploring these approaches with our panel of thought leaders who will provide insights on their personal decision-making process with app development. So to kick off today's presentation, I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Elizabeth Venefro. I head up marketing here at Technology Rivers, and I'm going to be moderating the panel discussion. So if you're unfamiliar with us, Technology Rivers is an innovative web and mobile product development company based in Northern Virginia. And over the last 7 years, we've created B2B and B2C applications for various industries and sectors, including healthcare, education, finance, franchisees, consumers, sales, and marketing. We work with entrepreneurs, founders, startups, and product owners to help them build highly scalable and flexible applications. And Technology Rivers has been ranked a numerous number of times as a top mobile app and custom software development firm in the DC area. Some of our apps have also been featured on the Apple and Google stores, as well as many other prominent tech forums and publications. So as part of our work, we often receive questions about building mobile or web apps, as well as building hybrid versus native. And mobile strategy is obviously key to any business. And this webinar is part of a series to help provide clarity around the questions that we often receive. Okay, so today we're joined by panelists, Graham Dodge, president at PathCheck, Marco Jacobs, president and CEO at Code Intellex, Justin Tracy, CTO at Workdrive, and Gazemfer Mansour, CEO at Technology Rivers. We'll be hosting a live Q&A with our panelists at the end of the webinar, so please feel free to submit those questions to us through the chat function. And team, thank you so much for being with us today. Let's go ahead and get started. So the first question I want to present to the panel is, what are the most popular approaches to custom mobile app development? And maybe I'll throw that one at you first, Justin.
Well, the most popular approaches for custom app development are really 3 different ways. So you can have full native, which is what most people are aware of, which is, you show up in the App Store with a iPhone app and an Android app. But there's 2 real ways of making those. There's one where you truly do the native level programming, which takes a decent amount of time and a decent amount of money to do it. But then there's a little less native approach where you can use some kind of off-the-shelf stuff to kind of get that done a little bit faster. That uses your back-end stack that's a little more like your regular web app. And then there's the straight up just mobile web, which would be doing like a progressive web app where HTML5 has kind of let this thing occur where there's this kind of hybrid between something you'd find in an app store and something that you can just run right from a website that mimics a real app. And if done right, it can look really, really almost the same. But the development time and the cost kind of goes the spectrum all the way from the progressive web app all the way up to a full native rollout that's found in the App Store.
Did Gazemfer, Marco, did you want to weigh in on that one as well?
No, I think Justin. Yeah, I think Justin hit the nail on the head there. There 3 different ways. There's native, hybrid, and then the mobile web. If I had to take a guess, I think a lot of newer apps that are coming online now are definitely using the hybrid approach.
How about you, Gazemfer?
Yeah, I agree. I think Justin pretty much covered. The only thing I'll add is in the hybrid, obviously, there are different approaches. And we often get that question about the wrapper apps. Sometimes you can also build a web app and then wrap it into the mobile app and deploy it as a native. So, but behind the scene is really a web app, but you're packaging it as a native app.
Okay, so kind of going along with that, what are some of the pros and cons to each of these different types and approaches? Gazemfer, you want to take that one first?
Yeah, absolutely. So I can talk about a couple, and I'll let the other talk about the rest. So I think the bigger pros of the hybrid is the quicker development time. You write one code, which is in JavaScript, and many other tools also provide different languages to write. So you write one code for both iOS and Android. So you can save a lot of time on the development side. On the native side, there are a lot of benefits in terms of the performance, because you can get some native experiences that you cannot get on the hybrid. It's very close, but still, there are some apps, there are some specific business needs, so you can have some apps do need to be native, but overall, I think in hybrid, you can do pretty much all. So I'll let Justin and Graham and Marco talk about the others.
Your thoughts, Marco?
All right, so Gazemfer, great points. I think one of the benefits to native would be if you have one of those apps that really depend on device specific features, that's a pro for native. But when it comes to a con for hybrid, one of the cons for hybrid is the exact opposite. When Apple or Google releases new features, not all the time will those hybrid platforms have access to those features right away. So there's a slight delay. It's not usually a long time depending on how active the community is, but there is a delay there. One of the other things I would talk about is also the pricing. When you have to have 2 development teams, if you're doing Apple or iOS or Google mobile apps, you have to have a Java team and you have to have a Swift team to manage those 2 different code bases. Whereas for hybrid platforms, you have one code base that you can use across the 2 for both. So you build it once and it goes to both stores. I typically prefer the hybrid for that reason, because you just have one team and one code base to manage, which makes things a lot easier.
I can sort of add, based on my experience. I mean, it used to be, I think, when PhoneGap was one of the earlier sort of wrapper type programs, it did have trouble leveraging some of the unique features of the operating system on what the device is. And that's basically what he's saying in terms of the device specific features. And at the time, I believe a lot of mapping features were also very device dependent, since Apple Maps and Google Maps were very different in terms of their APIs. So if you really wanted to have an elegant mapping experience on iPhone versus Android, you had to be very device specific, which probably meant you were going to develop those natively. And I would also just add to everything that was said that if you have someone on your team, if you have someone who's sort of stronger with Swift and iOS than they are with Java and Google, then you may need to think about that and develop and be like a iOS or Android first team. And there's a lot of companies that do that. They make that decision to sort of choose one, develop the strength there, and then bring in another team to do the other development for them. And I would also say that I think, I don't know enough about this in terms of the smart watches, but I would think that probably the smart watches are kind of like the way the mobile devices were maybe 5-10 years ago, where you still had very device specific operating systems that go into those. If you're looking at doing a smartwatch application, you probably have to be native, but someone here can correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, that all makes a ton of sense. But I agree heavily with the hybrid approach. If you can use your backend API stack and basic rendering stuff through JavaScript to get it out the door, if you don't need very specific, iOS level, operating system level functions, like, you should definitely go with the hybrid approach, just because it's way easier to maintain. It's way easier to get out the door. It's less cost effect. It doesn't cost as much to do. I've never went fully native unless I had to, but there's situations that you have to, but if you don't have to, it's way better. And the amount of stuff HTML5 is releasing, every day, it's like getting closer and closer to like a real, native experience. So I think if anything, like the hardcore old school native design is going to be less and less likely, because they're making it easier to do.
All right. So actually, I think to some degree, you all may have already answered this question, but which approach did you choose and why? I guess Marco or Justin, do you want to dig in a little bit more there?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So we chose a hybrid approach where we're leveraging a lot of the same stack that we had with our web app, but we also have an Electron app for the desktop. So we kind of had to take that into consideration too, because we're going to have desktop and mobile and web. And we didn't want to have like 3 total different teams on this with 3 total different UIs with 3 total different middleware. Like, it was just, they would have never been able to be accomplished in any type of real timeline. So we wanted to find the easiest way we could get, a native desktop, native mobile, and web done without making it so crazy that it's like unmaintainable by, a smaller tech team.
So one of the features that we looked at the strength of our team. The strength of our team at the time is Node.js. So we chose the hybrid approach, and the platform that we're using for that is React Native. One of the other things that I would caution people to look at too is take a look at the jobs that are out there and see what the demand is, so that you don't pick a platform that doesn't have developers that are available to actually develop that type of work. So you want to make sure that the resources are available to do the work, and you also want to work to the strength of your team.
That's great. Great insight there. And I'm going to shoot this next one over to you first, Graham. Do you need both an iOS and an Android app?
Well, yes. Short answer, I think, is yes. I mean, also it depends on where you live in this world. With a lot of the work that we do at PathCheck Foundation, especially as it relates to global health and public health, we often think about populations where Android is more popular, and that's mostly outside the US. So if you're looking for something that is going to expand or scale globally, then you certainly have to be thinking about both. And I think we often get sort of here in the US sort of the wrong perspective on this sort of challenge or debate, because we see so many people with iPhones, and it seems like iPhone is the sort of the clear front runner here in the US, whereas elsewhere in the world it's not. So I would say yes. If you're scaling globally, then absolutely you do. If you are basing your operations in somewhere else outside the US where Android's popular, maybe you go Android first, and likewise in the US, maybe you go iPhone first. But there's really no reason to. And I was going to add the previous question. I mean, when I first started out in mobile app development and was looking for development teams, we started off with iOS because we had someone with some iOS experience on our team. And then we brought in actually Gazenfer's team Actually, it wasn't initially Gazenfer's team. I'm chagrined to say it was a different team who then botched the Android app, and then we brought in Gazenfer's team to fix everything, which was so that's why I am still a Technology Rivers customer to this day. And for the more recent application I'm working on as part of a stealth startup, we definitely chose to go hybrid and go with React JS and those tools just for simplicity's sake, and also because it has come so far since the early sort of phone gap wrapper days. So I definitely would think that at this point, there's no reason not to do both at the same time, especially given the capabilities of hybrid and HTML5. Yeah, maybe there's specific geographic or device characteristics that still might demand that, but I think those are few and far between.
Okay, Gazenfer, was there anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I would say at the same time, there's a business need as well. So sometime timing or other factors may push one or other. So even if you are building hybrid app, both iOS and Android, but some customers choose to launch one, test it out, get the feedback before putting the other one on the App Store. But with the hybrid one, you're creating one app anyway, both app at one time anyway. So it's just a matter of additional testing efforts and putting it out. But if your specific needs are native for whatever the reason, then you should pick one or other. There's no right or wrong, as Graham said, depending on your audience, if you have more Android users versus iOS. But we highly recommend, even when it comes to web and mobile, we said launch with one so that you can get a feedback and before making changes on both. So it's better to start with one in terms of launch.
And again, remember, it's really even in the US. I think it's 55% iOS to 45% Android. So I mean, unless you don't like 45% of your revenue, I think that answers the question.
Marco, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, I was just gonna add there, if this was 10 years ago, okay, yeah, you had to choose one depending on your budget and your resources, right? Now that we have hybrid development available, you can use, there's really no reason to have to choose because you develop it once and it's available on all. And like Justin said, if you don't like 50% of your revenue, why wouldn't you do this? I think it's a no-brainer at this point.
I think that kind of goes into the next set of questions that we've touched on to some degree, but can your approach to app development impact the timeline? And my next question is going to have to do with budget, but let's start with timeline first. Maybe Graham, do you want to speak to that?
Sure. Well, I would say, again, given the advances in hybrid and HTML5 and thinking about it holistically from the perspective of your mobile web app experience and your native experience, it used to be, right, that you had to choose one or the other in terms of timeline because it was faster to develop one app than it was to develop two. But if you can actually develop both and your mobile experience at the same time, I mean, your mobile web experience at the same time, then all the better. So yeah, so I think these days that answer is quite clear, that you want to go hybrid in terms of saving time and money.
Gazenfer, what are your thoughts?
I totally agree. Obviously, if you're going hybrid, you're saving time and the development costs. So in case of native, obviously 2 developers, and Marco already talked about that. So you'll have multiple developers and all those efforts will be multiples of the number of devices and the platform that you're supporting.
So as I mentioned, the next question is really the same thing, but specific to budget. I know you've kind of touched on that. Anything else to add as far as budget as it relates to the different approaches? Gazenfer, Graham?
Well, yeah, if you have a co-founder, and that co-founder has a certain skill set and they are putting in sweat equity and they, for example, may only be really familiar with Swift, then that could be a reason to choose one or over the other. So kind of play to the strengths of your own sort of team and co-founders if you have them. But otherwise, if you are going out and contracting and outsourcing with a development company like Technology Rivers, then you certainly want to think holistically, and in doing so, by going hybrid, you are going to save money.
Okay. This is actually, I guess, two questions kind of combined here. Are there situations where one approach is not enough? And how do you combine a native and a hybrid approach? I know, Gazemfer, this is something you're pretty passionate about, so I'll start with you.
Okay, yeah, so there are times when you may have a certain feature of the app that has to be native. There's no, let's say, React Native or Flutter plugin available, so you have to go native for that. But the good thing is these platforms, especially React Native, allows you to mix native and hybrid code. So you can have a common code base. So let's say 80% of your application is a simple business application that could be built just with React Native, and only a small percentage, it could be something that's maybe directly working with the hardware or some beacon or some other features that has to be done native. You can write a native code, expose it as a library, and use it inside. So in today's world, if we were talking a few years ago, as Graham was earlier mentioning about these wrapper apps, there are challenges because you have to create a bridge between the web and the mobile. Now you can mix and match. So that's one of the reasons we highly recommend going hybrid approach, because you're not missing anything on the native side.
Marco, did you want to add to that?
No, I think Gazemfer was spot on with his comments there. I will add that this gives you the best of both worlds. And as I mentioned earlier, those outline features where you have to be super, super specific for operating system level features, this is an opportunity to take advantage of those features while still using a hybrid approach.
Okay, how about you, Justin?
Yeah, I mean, we ran across this when we first started. We had some very, just quick mock-up progressive web app stuff where, we kind of hit a wall with the ability to send push notifications at the level we needed. So like if you're thinking of going at the cheapest route and looking at just a PWA tile progressive web app, extension on your website, you will hit a wall pretty fast when there's stuff you need. Like when it comes to like engagement, for us is huge. We run an intranet, so every message they need to get a ring on their phone, just like Slack. So if they're not able to ensure that's happening, it was kind of like, hey, we need to stop here and make it something a little more native to ensure that that's happening. And it's kind of where we went.
Graham, some closing thoughts on this topic?
Yeah, I think that it can also depend on how deep your relationship is with both Apple and Google. So I know that when I was doing Sick Weather, we had a very close relationship with the Apple developers relations team, and they were always sort of pitching us like the new, the next sort of tools that they were going to make available in iOS. So, if you want to be that kind of a partner with Apple or Google, and you want to be sort of on the cutting edge, and you want, if they're going to come out with something like, another device like an Apple Watch or something like that, you want to be invited into that inner sanctum of developers that gets to go into an airplane hangar with high security and actually see it for the first time and play with it for the first time. Those are situations where I think the hybrid approach is probably not enough. If you want to take advantage of the sort of synergy that comes with being really deeply integrated with those teams and being like one of the first apps to take advantage of something that's brand new and very specific to one of the operating systems. Other than that, and I don't think so. I think that hybrid is enough. So yeah, that's one more sort of thought on that topic.
Okay, and actually we just got a question in, so I'm going to transition now to the open Q&A. Tina is asking, based on your experiences, is the hybrid dev model React.js with the geo mapping bridge option OS update reliable? Who wants to take that one?
I'm going to go ahead and volunteer someone else. And that's a very technical question. I'm not sure what the state of the art is in terms of hybrid with GIS
I
mapping
can go.
solutions.
I can start and then maybe others can chip in. Yeah, absolutely. As I mentioned, my last comment, you can mix native and hybrid. And in fact, we have seen those situations where some of those geo mapping tools do require some native libraries for a better experience, and you can still mix and match. So let's say if that is even 30% of your app, that part can be written native, and then the rest could be hybrid. And depending on that specific mapping features, we may even have this available in the React Native or Flutter libraries as well. But just in case if it's not, we can always mix. And then when you have this mix, 70% of your effort is on a single code base. Only 30% is repeated on iOS and Android.
And I think, if you're doing a GIS mapping stuff, I would look into what you can do with HTML5 right now. I mean, I just did a quick Google search, and like there's whole libraries already done like in HTML5 that do the full rendering, even the 3D like panning and tilting and all the other cool stuff you'd expect with that. It's kind of out of the box. And that's one thing as a developer, at least one that gets in trouble enough because I don't really know what I'm doing, but I can find stuff when it comes to the web, like packages, like ideas of people that have done it before. And that always helps developers. Like if you can point them in the right direction and be like, hey, I found this, library that seems to do this, hey, can we use this as a starting point? That has helped me in the past a lot, or like where you don't have to start from scratch and just say, hey, look, there's something out here that does this GIS 3D rendering, can we use it? And, don't always assume that everybody knows everything. Sometimes you can find this stuff and make the development process skip months of pain if you can, find something off the shelf that's already working, especially if it's a wrapper in HTML5. That makes it really easy.
Great. It looks like we have another question here. Flutter or React Native for cross-platform mobile development?
I can take that one. I've used both Flutter and React. And again, this boils down to what the strength of your team is. Will you have a mobile version? Will you have just a web version? You can get into the details of the performance. Some of these sites, they get really down into how fast and screens render versus Flutter versus React. From my experience, you won't notice the difference between the two. I would also suggest that if you're doing more of a web version and a mobile app, I would probably lean more towards React Native. Also, React has a larger community than Flutter does at the moment as well. So those are things to consider.
Any other
Absolutely.
thoughts?
I echo with Marco, especially if you're building web and mobile. React is probably the better choice, especially in our cases where we have created different applications where we have created a reusable component in React that you can reuse in React Native as well. So you can save some additional time on that. Yeah, there is a compromise on some of the experiences when you're sharing, when you're limiting some of the native components on top of the web, but still you can achieve quickly, especially in the startup world. That's very helpful.
Okay, great. And the next question we got, is there a difference in building an app for a phone versus a tablet?
Yeah, I can answer that. Yeah, I mean, it definitely is. If you have a tablet specific app that needs the extra screen space, you do have to build different views. And, again, the JavaScript libraries can handle this pretty well, especially if you already kind of mocked up those different views for the different screen resolutions. But it can be handled in both the hybrid and the total native solution. Actually, you can even do it in a progressive web app too with the CSS media query. So it's all doable, but it comes down to you as the designer of the app, like giving truly good kind of layouts and what you want to make sure that that screen's being fully utilized, and you kind of set the breakpoints, on tablet, I want these things exposed. On mobile, I'm fine with just having a subset, to have it like a truly good tablet experience. Don't just make it a bigger window. It always looks weird. You gotta make a different rendering if you're gonna do it. Otherwise, just don't even bother with that breakpoint.
That's helpful. Another question. How do you test the app to make sure it works on different types of devices? Thoughts on that one?
I mean, for mobile stuff, just the regular desktop and the progressive web apps, I use a lot of like the online browser testing, like Browser Stack, where you can just go and render it on a specific device and see exactly how it looks. So it actually natively runs it on like a Samsung Galaxy, whatever, and you can actually see not just the screen, but you can see the JavaScript console to see if anything specifically, dying on that device. And that works really well for the HTML5 style progressive web app or hybrid stuff. But for the native stuff, that's a little more complex. You got to do definitely unit testing and make sure that that's working at a lower level, which I'm not super good at.
Yeah, I'll add to that. Yeah, as Justin said, emulators are great. They work well. There are also a lot of services out there too, where they claim to have thousands of devices that they'll test it for you and go through and run them on different devices. Also, if you're using Google, there are services there that can emulate in the cloud in an automated fashion to see and check to make the things are output in the way that things should be and displayed on your mobile app.
All right. And can I download and test my app before it's made available on the App Store to the public?
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead, Zenford.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. Both Apple and Google have ways where you can have it, like in Apple case, it's a test flight where you add your device, you get the version on your device. It's not available on App Store. Once you're fully satisfied, then you publish it to the App Store for a live version. And the same is the case with Google.
Marco, did you have anything to add there? It seemed pretty straightforward.
Yeah, that was straightforward. That was it there.
All right, it looks like the last one that's come through, unless we get any more, which app approach do you recommend for data sensitive industries such as healthcare?
Did you read that one more time?
Which app approach do you recommend for data sensitive industries such as healthcare? Because Zenford, I know you worked with quite a few healthcare companies. Do you want to touch on this one?
Yeah, I can take it. So I think it really, I would say it's not really just healthcare, financials, and many other, or in fact, every other application will have some good level of security needed. So all these platforms are good enough for that. It's how you're storing the data. You have to know, let's say, the HIPAA compliance rules, what needs to be stored on the device and what's not, what you're allowed for how long. So those kind of things need to be followed. And whether you're writing code in Flutter or React Native, or if it's native, in all cases, you can handle all of those. It's more about the approach, how you build it versus the tool. The tool won't make a difference.
Okay. We actually did have a couple more come in, so I'm going to try to fit those in. Should startups implement a microservice architecture to V2 of product to decrease latency?
I would say that microservices architecture is pretty standard for mobile apps and web apps. I think you should really think about how you can break those services out. There are a lot of things that you want to process on the server that you may not necessarily want to process on the mobile app. For instance, payments, right? You don't want to deal with payment information or payment keys if you're using services like Stripe. You don't want to expose those to the mobile app, and that's something you want to have processed in a microservice on the server backend.
Yeah, and that's just one thing to be aware of too. Like if you're relying heavily on third-party APIs and microservices that you didn't write, just making sure that they're up and that they're not blocking the code from running. Maybe you add a kind of a proxy in between them, or you cache those results, especially if there's something that's sending you repetitive things, so that you can still function, if they have a little hiccup or something. And a lot of people are you've seen it, when one thing goes down in a AWS Virginia or something, and the whole world blows up. So you kind of want to protect yourself as much as you can against the reliance on third parties. Obviously you need them, you can't get around it, but just making sure that you kind of assume the worst always and not have your whole thing explode just because they're down.
All right, and it looks like this last question, if you're a novice to the app design and development process, but have an idea for an app, what's the best way to go about getting help for designing and developing it?
Right. So I would say the first thing, if you're just getting started and you just have an idea, I would really scale that down to an MVP, just a minimal viable product. Like scale it down to just the bare minimum to test your idea. From there, I would look for a designer. I would work for a designer to develop something in what's the thing called? I'm drawing a huge blank here, where you can have the interactive designs and click through Figma.
Or XD and there's a million things you could do that in.
Yeah, so definitely go through that, kind of get an idea of what you want. It makes it a lot easier when you approach companies or developers to know what you're looking for and what you're building, and you're able to talk through it and show something visually that way. Yeah, that's how I would approach it.
I would never, ever recommend going to any developer without is pretty much the screenshots. Yeah. Like I often go to like Theme Forest or like any of these websites that have these UIs done, and they usually come with like the code and the XD library, and I'll just go into XD and just build every single screen and just say, here it is, make this. That makes everybody's life so much easier, and then you don't have the questions of well, I meant something different in my head. I really thought I'd do this. You can just hand them it and just be like, here it is. Like, make these buttons work, and that makes a world of difference.
Yeah, I used to use InVision a lot to sort of show people what I was thinking in terms of an app idea. I know Figma has become really the more popular tool for that. So yeah, I would also highly recommend those tools for prototyping and just sort of generally going through the whole design thinking process on your own to come up with sort of something that would be your minimum viable product. I will also just add to all of that hackathons can be a great place to meet, to sort of workshop your ideas and meet other developers. And just so happens, my other organization called Magic, we're hosting a hackathon this Saturday, this February 25th at Carroll Community College in Maryland. And it's the kind of thing where you can bring like an app idea, and then we'll pair you with other younger developers who can maybe help you prototype that over the course of that hackathon. So look up hackathons and meetups for other developers, and you might be able to find someone who can help you.
So I think what Justin and Graham said and Marco, all great. But I've also seen like many people may not even want to go that or have struggled even on those. Not everybody can do XD, not everybody. So I think it's still like we suggest like you start putting down whatever you know. So it's like we always give example of house building. Like you have an idea, you're not going to be drawing your blueprint. You let the builder do that. But you have an idea, you put down whatever you want, and then your builder can put a blueprint that tells exactly what you want. And then your vision could be mentioned, but you may start with the studio because you start the MVP with a small, and that goes with whatever I think Marco or Justin was saying, like have the very minimum MVP. So that keep that vision to whatever that mention is, but keep the initial version MVP to really small. That's launchable. So when we say studio, we mean launchable. It's not something you build and it's not usable, because with the studio you have the bath, kitchen, and all of those. So even if it's a one use case that handles log in, do XYZ, and exit, if that app is usable with that one flow. So narrowing down to that would help you build a quick MVP. And Elizabeth can share more afterwards if you have more specific.
Yeah, so actually, that's a great transition. That was our last question. So if you do have any additional questions, here's our contact information. Really want to thank everyone for spending time with us today. Like I said, feel free to reach out. We will be sending out a recording of today's presentation, and please keep your eyes peeled for upcoming webinars. We hope you have a great day. Thanks so much to our panelists as well. See you next time.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.